But when an HOA board demanded the keys to a black homeowner's private gate just so they could get to the lake faster, they thought they were entitled. What they didn't expect was a knock at their own door. From the police. On the edge of a quiet lakeside community stood Marcus Carter's home. Marcus was a man who valued peace, privacy, and family above everything else. After years of hard work as an engineer, he had saved enough to buy a house with a view that took his breath away. A clear, shimmering lake framed by pines. But this lake was special to Marcus for another reason. It wasn't just the water. It was what it represented. A place where he and his late father used to fish. A place he now shared with his kids. It was sacred ground. The only catch? The Homeowners Association, the HOA, claimed authority over everything. From the height of fences, to the color of mailboxes, to when you could use the community pool. Still, Marcus kept his distance, stayed respectful, and followed the rules. What no one knew was that the side of the lake where Marcus's property stood had direct gated access, a small wooden gate he had installed legally. Approved years earlier, when the community was first developing. It was his private path, his sanctuary, until one day, the HOA came knocking. It began with a letter. The HOA president, a man named Charles Whitmore, wrote in sharp legal language that Marcus was to provide a copy of his gate key to the HOA board. Their reason? So that board members and authorized personnel could access the lake more conveniently, without walking the extra quarter-mile to the public entrance. Marcus frowned as he read the words aloud in his kitchen. His teenage daughter asked, "Dad, they can't really do that." "Right?" Marcus sighed. "No, sweetheart. They can't. This is our gate, our property." He thought it would end with a polite refusal, but he underestimated their arrogance. The next week, 3 HOA enforcers showed up on his doorstep. Clipboards in hand, sunglasses on. They looked less like neighbors and more like debt collectors. "Mr. Carter," Charles began smugly, "we're here for the key." Marcus folded his arms. "This is my property, my gate." "You have no right," Charles smirked. "You signed an agreement when you moved in. The HOA controls community access." Marcus shook his head. "Show me where it says you get to trespass through my yard." The other men chuckled. "Look, don't make this hard. Everyone knows you don't need the gate as much as the rest of us. Be reasonable, reasonable." That word stung. Reasonable meant surrender. Reasonable meant letting people stomp all over the boundaries he had fought so hard to protect. Marcus's voice dropped. "So the answer is no." The next day, a violation notice appeared in his mailbox. Then another. First, they claimed his grass was an inch too high. Then they said his garden shed was painted the wrong shade of brown. Every week a new fine, but Marcus kept calm. He documented everything, kept records, took pictures. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for principle. Then came the worst day. Marcus returned from work to find his wife shaken, standing by the gate. The lock had been tampered with, scratches all along the metal. Someone had tried to break in. His blood boiled. His sanctuary was no longer safe. He marched straight to the HOA meeting that evening. The board members sat in smug silence as he confronted them. "You tried to break into my property," Marcus said, voice trembling with fury. Charles leaned back in his chair. "That's a bold accusation. Maybe the lock just wore out, but if you'd given us the key, none of this would be a problem." The room fell silent. Marcus realized they weren't just bullying him. They were daring him. So he made a decision. Instead of yelling, instead of fighting fire with fire, Marcus turned to the law. He went straight to the sheriff's department, armed with documentation, photos, and copies of every threatening notice. The deputy listened carefully, eyebrows raising higher with each piece of evidence. Finally, he said, "Mr. Carter, you've done the right thing. Leave it with us." A week passed. Marcus carried on as usual, though tension lingered in the air. The HOA sent another letter, this one more aggressive, threatening legal action if he didn't comply. But before Marcus could even open it fully, there was a knock. Not at his door, at the HOA president's. It was a warm Saturday morning when patrol cars rolled into the neighborhood. Red and blue lights flickered against the quiet suburban streets. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Kids froze on bicycles, and there in front of Charles Whitmore's house, officers stepped out. They weren't smiling. They weren't friendly. They carried clipboards, warrants, and authority. The officers rapped on the door. Charles answered, confusion spreading across his face. "Mr. Whitmore? We need to speak with you regarding multiple complaints of harassment, property damage, and unlawful demands," Charles stammered, his arrogance draining away. This is a misunderstanding. We were just enforcing community standards." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Breaking locks isn't a standard. Targeting a homeowner isn't policy. This looks a lot like harassment and intimidation." The crowd of neighbors now gathering outside whispered. For years, many had felt bullied by the board but stayed silent. Now they were watching justice unfold at the very doorstep of the man who thought himself untouchable. In the weeks that followed, the HOA unraveled. Charles was forced to step down pending investigation. The board faced scrutiny for misuse of funds, unfair treatment, and harassment. Other neighbors began to speak up, emboldened by Marcus's courage. One by one, stories came out about petty fines, threats, and intimidation. The HOA's reputation shattered. As for Marcus, he stood taller than ever. The gate remained his. The lake remained his sanctuary. But the greatest victory wasn't the wood and metal. It was the respect of his community. Neighbors stopped him on the street to say thank you. Children waved as he passed. His family, once isolated, was now surrounded by support. One evening, Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset when a woman approached, an elderly neighbor he'd never spoken to before. She smiled nervously. "Mr. Carter, I want to thank you. Years ago, they did the same thing to my husband. They pushed him until he gave in. We didn't have the strength to fight. But you stood up. You showed us all we don't have to be afraid." Marcus's eyes softened. He realized then this fight was never just about a gate. It was about dignity, about teaching bullies that boundaries mattered. In the end, the HOA tried to bully Marcus Carter into surrendering his keys. But what they unlocked instead was their own downfall, because sometimes the strongest walls aren't built of wood or steel. They're built of principle, courage, and the refusal to be intimidated. And sometimes the shortest path to the lake is the longest fall from power. The HOA demanded keys to a man's private gate. Instead, they found the police knocking on their own door. If you believe no one should ever be bullied out of their rights, share this story. Because courage is contagious, and standing up once can change everything.